Okay, I guess that's it. Thank you, and yeah, enjoy the rest of the CakeFest.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, so we are running a little bit behind, but we're going to jump right in. Make sure you stay tuned. We have some giveaways coming up pretty soon. Remember to use our hashtags to ask any questions in the CakeFest Slack channel. Thank you to our sponsor, Mark's Software. Lucas, if you're in here, we are so glad to have you. Thanks for being a supporter of our event. But let's keep going. You probably know this guy from his podcast. You probably even follow him on social media. So everybody, let's welcome Kel Evans.
Hi, everybody. Let's get the screen sharing here and get this underway. I think that's it. It is my great privilege to be here. I am just excited to be back at CakeFest. I was here for the CakeFest in New York a few years ago and had a wonderful time. It's great to talk to you all again. I am contractually obligated to give a shout out to my friends at SiteGround for providing me with awesome swag. Other than that, let's get going. I'm a scuba diver. Technically, I am a professional scuba diver because I have a dive master certification. And I live in West Palm Beach, Florida, and we're lucky enough to have one of the most beautiful dive sites around called Blue Heron Bridge. It's a shore dive. It's wonderful. The problem is that because it's a shore dive, you have to time it with the tides. If you time it right, you can float right along the trail and everything's beautiful. So it took me a while to figure out all of this. And one of the problems is, as a programmer, I need to get my head around things and, of course, automate things. So that's what we're going to do. So let's talk a little bit about DateTimeMath, which is what I use to solve this problem. And I'm going to show you some beautiful pictures of the Blue Heron Bridge. Now, we've come a long way. Let's see, yeah, okay. We've come a long way from the early days of DOS, and we didn't even have Unix timestamps then, and DateTimeMath. One of the absolute first constants I ever learned when I was programming was 86,400. Every programmer eventually learns that one number. But back in the early days, back when we were programming when I was programming in DOS, if you needed to do date time math, you took your current date and you converted it to Zulu time, and then you converted Zulu time to seconds, and then you added or subtracted however many seconds you wanted, and then you converted that number back into a time in Zulu time, and then you converted that back into the current time zone. And each of these were manual steps. For many years, this is the standard way that we dealt with date time math. None of those steps deal with the boundaries or any of the fun things involved in date time math. Thankfully, in PHP, my good friend, Mr. Derek Reethans, several years ago, came up with the DateTimeMath library, and he's made it all so much easier. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, a story. This is Blue Heron Bridge at Phil Foster Park in Riviera Beach, Florida. Now, judging from the fact that the city of Riviera Beach decided to honor old Phil with a man-made island that is essentially a parking lot, we can only assume that Phil made his mark on the world paving things. Most weekends, these waters are teeming with locals getting away from the stress for a few hours and families picnicking. It's a wonderful place. Now, these pictures that I'm showing you were all taken during a few months ago during the lockdown, when all of the state parks and county parks here in Florida were closed during the quarantine. I have never, ever seen this bridge this empty. I mean, literally, if it's daylight, this place is packed. Every weekend, these waters are teeming with scuba divers, both student and certified divers, because the Blue Heron Bridge was voted the best U.S. shore dive site in 2013. It is absolute wonderful place. That is Lifeguard Station East right there. Blue Heron Bridge, though, is a tricky dive site for the uninitiated diver. Because of strong currents, care has to be taken to time the entrance just right to get in the water just at the right time. Now, if done properly, the diver has time to float along the snorkel trail of man-made coral reef starters and enjoy the wildlife that lives along those. We see, I was there 3 or 4 weeks ago. We had this 10-foot spotted eagle ray. It's gorgeous. And then you turn and you float right up. We turn right here at Suez and we float right up under here, under the bridge, and see the myriad of life that calls this dark spot home. And finally, the divers are pushed just far enough south to get to a sunken sailboat off the southern dock. And we got about 10, 15 minutes to spend looking around there before the tide shift. And once the tide shifts, we ride back up under the bridge, make the turn, and swim safely back to the swim area right here before exiting and going and cleaning our gear. Each year, however, we lose tens of divers to the current. Divers who time the dive incorrectly and find themselves riding the tide out to this sandbar where there's usually 50 or 60 boats anchored and coolers just floating in the water. And they helplessly stand up, shed their gear, bum a cold beer off of one of the flotillas of boats there. We can do better than this. We don't have to lose divers. It's a joke if you're not getting that. Sometimes these things don't translate. So I decided to write an application that would help divers more easily time this. So I hammered out a quick little command line utility that will not only show them the tide tables for any given day, but will also give them the exact time they need to get into the water to maximize their safety and enjoyment. Oh, wait. Oh, I forgot to tell you. This is Peanut Island. Now, the Blue Heron Bridge is down here. This blank area right here, that's a decommissioned presidential bunker built in 1960s for President Kennedy. And the Kennedys used to frequent this area quite a bit. It was actually known as the Southern White House for a while, the West Palm Beach area. And so for security reasons, they had a nuclear bunker built like that. It used to be open for tours. They've got it closed for rehab right now, but I just found that interesting. But that's the sandbar. Usually there's 50, 60 boats tied up right there. So let's look at the code. Okay, now I've got to do some screen swapping. I'm going to stop this share and I'm going to share my main screen. And then I got to move some things around. And one more, let's get rid of that. Y'all probably can't see that. Okay, so I sat down and started writing a little utility. Oh, and this is what it looks like, okay? You can now go, ooh, ah, because, it's that exciting. That is NOAA tide stations, which in the United States, NOAA is National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association. It's a government agency. It's a government agency, and they have buoys all around the coastline of the U.S. And this is the buoy for the Port of Palm Beach, which is right there at Blue Heron Bridge and Peanut Island. And this tells me that there are 2 high tides today, because this is the date. The first one was at 1:31 a.m., that yellow number right there. Nobody dives the bridge at 1:31 a.m. I mean, absolutely nobody gets up that early to dive it. The second one will be at 2:18 p.m., which if I time it right, I can get done with here, grab my gear, which is actually already in my Jeep, and I could actually make that if I wanted to. Now, there's a couple things you have to take into consideration when you're diving the bridge, because it's a shore dive. We usually call 10 minutes. And at 10 minutes, everybody starts getting your gear on and all this. All the professional divers, or all the certified divers already have cleaned up everything and made sure that everything's secured. So they get their gear on. And fins wet is when we're actually walking in the water. And usually that's 30 minutes. I've got it set for 30 minutes here. It could be up to 60 minutes. A lot of the photographers will get in 60 to 90 minutes beforehand. If you do that, though, sometimes you have to swim against some of the current. Then you've got the high tide marked here and the walkout. And that's really all it is. Now, we do have the student version of this, which gives us 30-minute warning. The Blue Heron Bridge is a communal area. It's a county park, which means that even though we set up all of our gear on a picnic table, if we can find one, we can't leave stuff there. I like to tell people that cell phones, nice water bottles, expensive flip-flops, these are all things that dive masters sell on eBay to make money, because dive masters don't really get paid. So, when we're teaching, we call 30 minutes, which is the time when students have to, before they put on their gear or anything, they have to look at everything on the table and say, is that going in the water with me? It's not going in the water, it needs to go in the car. Then we go, we do the 10 minutes fins wet. Fins wet is 1 hour before, because not only are we going to float along and have some fun, we're actually doing some teaching. And then, of course, there's walkout. So in doing all of this, I really started diving into the date time features of PHP. And, I've used them, and, I know Derek, and usually my using date time involved me DMing Derek on Twitter saying, Derek, how do I do this or how do I do that? Well, I've decided I'm going to figure this stuff out. So I sat down and I started doing some figuring out. The first thing I figured out is I love the immutable, okay? Date time immutable. You will almost never see me use the standard date time class. I always use the immutable, because anything that I do to a date time immutable returns me a new object. Okay, the original one is still there. Like right here, I'm creating a start date, which is just today. If I don't pass in any times, then it's starting today in today's time. And I'd say start date add and a new date interval. And we'll get into that in just a second. But that returns me a new date time. It does not modify start date. It gives me a new date time called end date. And end date is 7 days in the future. Start date is still today. I can still make additional calculations on that. I use that a lot. I use that in the fins wet area and the 10 minutes and the 30 minutes, because it never, my high tide never changes. I can just keep subtracting things from it. Then there's the date time interval. And we use this a lot in this demo, but date time interval takes a format, okay? An interval is literally that. How many days, weeks, months, years, seconds, hours, however many, whatever interval you're dealing with, this is how you specify it. And in this case, I want 7 days. Now, date time interval format always starts with a P, okay? And since all I'm doing is days, we're going to say P, 7, and D. That tells it that this is 7. The 7 is a D. We'll deal with times in just a minute. Now, in this case, I have added 7 days to today, and I got my end date, and I'm just going to echo those out. And of course, like any good PHP programmer, var don't die is your friend. Okay, so I'm just gonna paste these in, or uncomment these and show you. Oh, let's get rid of the student. Although I don't think those affect any of these. Okay, so today is the 9th. 7 days from now is the 16th. It's really that easy. Okay. That's the easy way to, or that's how easy it is to do date time math. Now, I told you that's dates, but what if we want to just add some times? Well, it's the same thing. I've got my start time, which is my date time immutable, and my end time, but my format for my date interval changes a little bit, okay? Now I have to put a T in there. So I've a P, because it always starts with a P, and then I tell it this portion is going to be for time, 30 minutes, okay? 30, and the M, that's all it's necessary. And if I run this, and I get the start time is 10:19, 30 minutes from now is 10:49, which if I've timed this talk correctly, you should be well into your break. So we can add and subtract dates and times very easily. One of the cool things about PHP, and when I say cool things, I mean things that programmers abuse on a regular basis, is the string to time function. And Derek integrated that into the date time. Now, all I'm doing here is I'm going to create a new date time, and I'm going to show my format. And since I'm not doing any additions or anything like that, I stuck with the standard date time, but this is just all one big command. but I'm going to give it the first day of July. Okay. And it's going to figure out what the first day of July is. And it's just going to give it to us, July 1st, 2020. Okay. Since I didn't give it any instructions for the year, it assumed this year. Now, I've seen people, PHP has a string to time function, and for years we've had that since either PHP 3 or 4, and for years I've seen developers abuse that mercilessly to do weird stuff that would never ever be possible in other language. That's one of the great things about PHP. But sometimes you need your date times formatted in a very specific format. Okay. In this case, I'm going to show you the ISO 8601 format. Give me just 1 second. I'm about to be attacked by my Roomba, and nobody wants that. There we go. I'm going to show the ISO 8601 format, and that's a worldwide standard for date format. So if you're storing things in databases or stuff like that, this is a great format to be using. Boom. Okay, now we can see here that I've got my date, I've got my time, I've even got negative 0400. I am in Eastern Daylight Time Zone, or like we say here in Florida, Mickey Standard Time. And you can always tell Mickey Standard Time because Mickey's little hand is on the 3 and Mickey's big hand is on your wallet. That's Mickey Standard Time. If you've ever been to any of the Disney resorts, you get that joke. So that's and PHP comes with a bunch of different standard formats. So and they're all in the datetime interface object. So you can just use that if you don't have one that you specifically need. And most of my stuff, I'm using capital Y, which is the 4-digit year, dash M dash D. That's kind of my standard for display. Comment those out. There we go. Okay. But what if I need to know diffs? And I saw somebody earlier doing this, and I know Cake has some stuff built in for this, but if you need to do it in the bare bones, here's how we do it here. Okay, now I'm creating 2 date times. The first is today, and the second is the first day of July 1999, because we're getting ready to plan for our party like it's 1999. That's date 1 and date 2, and I simply say the diff is date 1 diff date 2. It literally is that easy. But now what's that going to give us? Well, let's take a look at it. That gives us a date interval object. Okay, remember up here we were creating date intervals and we specified this is 30 minutes. Well, this one is 21 years, 3 months, 8 days, 10 hours, 23 minutes and 8 seconds, and 0.41 seconds to the from the first day of July 1999. Okay. It gives you all of that. It gives you several other pieces, but it gives you all of that. And I believe this fractional seconds is new in PHP 7. I don't think that was originally in the datetime interval. I think they added that just in the 7 branch. But it does give you all of that. Now, most people are not going to calculate a diff that's 21 years from now, or 21 years ago, okay? But the same concepts work. What about time zones? Because time zones, Barbie said it best, datetime math sucks, okay? Or datetime math is hard. And time zones are one of the things that make it hard. Here in the great state of Florida, our legislature has voted and passed a law that says we no longer want to participate in daylight savings time. And I am pushing. I've got a petition out there to call this Mickey Standard Time, although I've only got like 5 signatures on it. But I want to call it Mickey Standard Time, but we're trying to opt out of it. And that's the great thing about time zones is things like daylight savings time mess with them, but not everybody participates. And not every time zone is on an even hour mark. There are time zones that aren't. Well, Linux and Unix have handled this for quite some time. PHP has been handling this well. Derek's got some great things in there that make this very easy. So the first thing I'm going to print here is the time zone object for UTC. And let's just take a look at that. And then I'm going to take the current, I'm going to take December 1st, 2020, and here, and convert that to UTC, and convert that to the Eastern Standard Time, my time, and we'll take a look at that. So first thing is the time zone. The time zone object, I created it, it's UTC, and notice it says time zone type 3. Well, there are 3 types of time zones. The first is a UTC offset. When you see that negative 0400, that means that I am 4 hours off of UTC, and that extra 00 is because sometimes it falls on a half hour. I don't know of any, there probably are, but I don't know of any that are not bound by the half hour, if not the hour, but it is possible that it could be 0430 or 0330 or something like that. Type 2 is the time zone abbreviation, GMT, UTC, EST, EDT. Those are, that's the type 2 time zone. And time zone 3 is the official identifier, as in Europe, London, or America, New York. America, New York, America, Detroit are the 2 that we use most commonly for Eastern time zone. So, and you can see that to convert a time, I created a time in UTC, and then I converted it to American Detroit, and then I just print the date, and time. So December 1st, midnight at December 1st, 2020 in UTC is actually November 30th, 1900 hours here in Eastern time zone. So that's how easy it is to convert things back and forth between time zones. For the application I wrote this for, and I'll show you this in a little bit, I'll show you the complete application, but for the application I wrote this for, I only deal with local time zones. There's no need for me to convert back and forth because no one is going to be looking at tide table. You're not going to be looking at the Blue Heron Bridge tide table unless you are here or planning on being here and you're going to be diving here. So I don't convert back and forth between time zones. When I do have applications where time zone is important, I always store things in UTC and convert, I have each customer or each site or whatever has its own time zone, and before I display it, I will display it, or I will convert it into that time zone. But on larger, like I said, larger applications where time zones are important, I always store the time zones or the times in UTC. Okay, this one was fun. I need to iterate over a date range, and there's a couple ways you can do it. And I found a blog post written about 7-8 years ago by a friend of mine, and it actually did it, but it used the regular date functions in PHP, and it was kind of ugly. And then I got to look, and I'm like, well, we've got date period, and we've got date time immutable. What can we do here? So I create a date period, and there's 2 ways I can do this. The first one is I'm setting a date time interval of 1 day, and I'm creating a date period that is today's date, that interval of 1 day, and I want 30 days. So I now have an iterable object that is 30 days long. It has 30 elements, and it's going to, each element represents 1 day. I can also create a period with a start date, an interval, and an end date. And if the interval is this same one of 1 day, then this is, since my end date here is 7 days, this is just going to give me 7. But if my interval was PT1H, 1 hour, I would get 24 hours times 7 days in this interval, or in this, in this date period. So I'm going to print it out, and then I'm going to echo out the dates just so that you can see this. 30 days. I mean, it's starting with today's date and going for 30 days. And here's what an interval looks like. Okay. Or I'm sorry, this is what a period looks like. I've got my start date, which I handed it, and I've got my interval object, which I handed it, and the interval just simply says 1 day. And reoccurrences are 31, today's date plus 30, which kind of tripped me up when I was doing this final application, because I was expecting only to get 30 days. I actually got 31 out of it. So you have to know to adjust for that and subtract if you don't want today's date, because I was always looking in the future. That's it for the stupid pet tricks, okay? Date time interval is the date time system that PHP has is a very powerful system, and it's one that every developer should know about. Every developer should be using. The takeaway here I want you to come out with is DateTimeMath is still hard. I mean, there's still a lot of things that can trip you up, but it's much easier with PHP. And I know a lot of you are polyglot developers and you do things in PHP and in JavaScript. My wife, the lovely and talented Kathy, is learning JavaScript, and she was helping me with this application that I was going to show you with some other aspects of it. And she was trying to do the DateTimeMath in JavaScript. And I could not believe honestly, how difficult it was to do the stuff that we do here in PHP in a couple lines of code. How to do that stuff in JavaScript. It was so frustrating to her that she eventually gave up on it and said, you just do it in PHP. So I would normally swap back to the other slides, but let's not do that. Let me show you the final application. The other slide was, and most of you have seen it, the old graphic, how to draw an owl, okay? You draw a circle here, you draw a circle here, you draw the rest of the owl, okay? The rest of the effing owl. And that's what I'm showing you. I've given you the basic building blocks that we build with in PHP, but now I want to show you what I built, okay? This is my Dive website. I guess I have a Dive website. And it's not important that you go visit this, but on it, I have a chart for the tides at Blue Heron Bridge. And as you can see, I create my date period, I spin through it. I also pull sunrise and sunset, but I give you high tide this morning was at 1:31, and high tide is at 2:18. Now, technically, we have high tides and low tides on both of these, but I don't bother with low tides because nobody dives at low tide. It's just not important for this particular application. And this is NOAA station 8722588, which is the port of West Palm Beach. Now, what if I wanted to track another one? Well, NOAA has them all over the place. Hang on, let's see. Do I have it here? I do. This is the buoy at Chickasaw Creek in the great metropolis of Chickasaw, Alabama, which I grew up in. And this tells us, now notice there's only one event, okay? This tells us that there was only one high tide at Chickasaw Creek. It's a small little town. We can't afford to, no, I'm kidding. You have meteorological day, or you have days in the system that you only have one high tide, and the other is called a slack tide. It's basically you just don't have a high tide. But high tide at Chickasaw Creek marker was at 2:52 a.m. this morning. You can see the station changed. If I wanted to dive at Chickasaw Creek, and trust me, nobody wants to dive Chickasaw Creek. I used to go swimming there. That was what we called the swimming hole. Nobody wants to swim there anymore. I probably shouldn't have swum there when I was there. But if I was teaching, I would have people roll in at fins wet at 3:52 so that we had high tide at 4:52, and we'd be walking out skills complete at 5:52. But that's what all of this was built for. And my journey into the date time system, and like I said, I had a lot of this code written as old school code. And when I say old school code, I mean the way we used to write it, PHP 4, early PHP 5, before Derek wrote the date time objects. We had, I had a lot of this written, and then I started saying, well, you know, I've got all these new object-oriented ways of doing this. Let's deal with that, deal with it that way. Okay, let me stop that. Let me pop right. Oh, I have questions. I was not ready to deal with questions. Share that. Okay, date, time, and math is hard. The other thing I want you to understand is we can save divers from drifting off onto the sandbar and resorting to a life of debauchery. Unless that's what they're into. And if that's what they're into, they've probably put away their dive gear for the day anyhow. Hey, I want to thank you all so much. I hope that you have found this informative. I hope that you have found this to be a useful use of your time. And I hope you enjoy CakeFest. Like I said, I've been enjoying the talks that I've seen so far. I enjoyed it when we were all in New York. It was a wonderful time. And I'm so glad and so honored to have been invited back. Do I have time for any questions? If not, I can answer them in chat.
Yeah, if you'll answer them in the chat, and then we can get